Welcome again. This is our last session, and in this session, I want to take somewhat a different approach, which I think will be more practical and more empirical in terms of explaining some of the concepts that I have been bringing up in the previous sections. Now, just to remind you, we took 4 questions that I said will help us to explore the question about African studies, which were: what is Africa? Who is an African? Where is Africa? And then finally, how and who can study Africa? I will not dwell so much on the question of who, but today I want now to discuss about how to study Africa. From our previous lesson, we talked about Matatu. I hope you remember what it is. And if you don't, well, we'll be discussing it again today, so please do not worry. We talked about Matatu as a place that can help us rethink the idea of who belongs, in tandem with notions of citizenship, following an idea by James Ferguson on what he calls presence, where he argues that the nation-state frame of membership is inadequate, therefore proposing that obligation to share, which never depends on only formal membership, but also the presence on being here, is a unique lens to open up our understanding of who should belong in an African setting. So his work, Presence and Social Obligation, strives to demonstrate that such obligatory sharing based on presence can be observed in the way that marginalized urban population access state services, however unequally or inadequate across Africa they could be. We will take Matatu again as an example of deconceptualizing African studies, following insights we got from Wainaina and Ferguson, and using Matatu as a site for African area studies focused on everydayness, with an aim to achieve 4 things, which are: study particular locales and contexts to inform larger discussions regarding social relations, modernities, and mobilities. We also want to use Matatu to make sense of mimicry and the place of an African culture in the age of globalization. We also want to recognize the topographies of power that are not just national, but they can be transnational, not just vertical, but they can also be horizontal. We also want to acknowledge multiple conflicting and intersectionalities of politics, economics, and cultural logics that operate in contemporary Africa. But we also want to be aware of what globalization is doing in Africa and how it is remaking it. Now, politics of everydayness, explained here with a Matatu analogy, will give us numerous counter-narratives to the single story and offset the emphasis on the perennial crisis that saturates Western media sources, portraying daily life in Africa as nothing but hardship, violence, and despair. Matatu also depicts agency of Africans in their daily lives by providing narratives capturing everyday life as ordinary experiences, sharing insights into the lives of individuals whose perspectives would otherwise remain hidden, emphasizing creativity, leisure, and pleasure. We can define everyday life as the ordinary and extraordinary aspects of lived experiences and daily practices that provide valuable insights into broader social issues. Now, I want you to start by looking at these 2 pictures, which are train routes in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, and Tokyo. Most of you might be familiar with Tokyo, and most of you might not be familiar with Nairobi. But this is how the train routes look in these 2 cities. I am aware that Tokyo is, of course, more diverse than Nairobi is, but Nairobi is also still a dynamic city in Africa. But the essence of this map is actually to show you how unique Matatu then is in terms of transportation. These are the train routes, but we'll be looking at the alternative for train routes today as used in Nairobi. So we want to think about what is Matatu, how it was invented, its relationship with the state, how unique it is, what kind of challenges is faced by matatu, and why matatu is popular, and an interesting part, which is matatu is a site for pop culture, and how matatu has helped to build a nation before we come to a conclusion. So what is matatu? Matatu is basically a small bus or a minibus used as a form of public transportation in Kenya. It's often brightly decorated and usually plays loud music. It's an important part of a country's transportation system for daily needs and accommodates all classes of travelers. Matatu is privately owned. The word matatu comes originally from a Kikuyu word which meant 3 cents or 3 big cents. So initially this one was to show you that matatu was most cheapest way of offering transport within the city. But when we look at matatu also, we see some socio-economic and political aspects within Kenya, which might include rapid urbanization, organized crime, entrepreneurship, social insecurity, transition to democracy, chaos and congestion, and popular culture. So these are some of the themes that we observe inside or outside a matatu. Let's now think a little bit about how matatu was invented. Under the colonial rule, the Kenyan government set place strict rules that regulated who could come into the city. So many Africans could not access the city during the colonial times. As the colonial rule ended in the 1960s, more Africans began going to the city to look for better opportunities. So between 1960 and the mid-1980s, we see the birth of matatus, which was a small vehicle, not so luxurious, but often was much more affordable and cheap, so therefore accessible to many ordinary Kenyans. This is a picture of a matatu in the beginning stages in early 60s. This is how it looked like. Now, with the ever-growing population, the need for transportation in the city, of course, increased and became critical, and therefore, matatu began offering this opportunity. Some people became entrepreneurial and exploited that opportunity. Nairobi's majority population were unable to purchase a car. This is the reason why matatu became popular, and therefore, the alternative was the cheaper public transport. With the growing number of matatu and commuters, we begin seeing more accidents that were being caused by matatu riders. And one of the interesting depiction of this is the stickers that were in matatus then, depicting the speed. Just for your information, maybe not so much important information, but one of the sticker read like this: at 80 kilometers and 100 kilometers per hour, 120 kilometers per hour. So you have a message of what happens, what is likely to happen if the driver is going at these different speeds. But the point here is trying to explain that accidents became common with the use of matatu as a public means of transport. In the mid-1980s, we also see now the state coming in to regulate, perhaps because of the many accidents that were happening. And some of the regulations were the driver was supposed to be 24 years of age, must hold a driving license for at least 4 years, and then those licenses must be approved as public service vehicles, and then they must have insurances. The cars were supposed to have annual inspection, and then there was also a limit of how many passengers the matatus could carry. So one of the responses to these state regulations was a matatu strike that happened in 1984, because many of them were opposed to these state regulations. Now, I want us to think a little bit about the uniqueness of matatu. One, matatu is purely Kenyan-owned product without any outside interventions. Matatus offer indiscriminatory services to all people, and opportunities also to all people. So whether people are educated or not educated, whether people are in low class or lower classes of the society, they can have job opportunities in the matatu, and they can also travel inside a matatu. But in terms of jobs opportunities, they offer jobs as matatu drivers. They are also matatu the ones that help the drivers to collect the charges from the customers, called the touts and conductors. So these are the job opportunities offered by inside a matatu. Matatu can be seen, therefore, to be, supporting the government economically. But another aspect of a matatu is its political influence on the citizens. And recently, matatu has evolved to become a definitive site for city's culture and street life, and we shall be discussing that in a few minutes. Before we do that, then let's highlight a few challenges faced by matatu. One is competition from the state. At one time, the state actually introduced buses because having an argument that they needed to contain the chaos that were brought about by matatu. So they introduced the Kenyan bus service, which acted as a competitor from the matatu industry. The other challenge is frequent road accidents, which might be as a result of poor road infrastructure or just mere careless driving by the drivers of the matatu, but also corruption from the states. Often during the road trips, the matatu drivers are required to be checked whether they maintain the conditions set by the state for the matatus. And one of the most common ways to escape these limitations is just giving a bribe to the police, who are supposed to be keeping off the unroadworthy vehicles on the roads. Another challenge is that matatus have acted as sites for organized crimes and gangs. So they have accommodated previously criminal gangs like Mungiki, who sometimes are hired by politicians to harass their political opponents and enemies, or even just for the purposes of mobilization. Finally, another big challenge for matatus is that usually it's the challenge of low profitability. One of the reasons could be, they have to deal with many policemen that take bribes and therefore rip off their daily earnings, besides other challenges. But then the question is, why is matatu so popular in Nairobi? I have three offers to explain this. One is matatus are affordable. The other one is they are flexible. Unlike a train which stops at designated places, matatu will stop at any convenient place, either to pick passengers or to drop passengers. And finally, matatus are fashionable. So therefore, passengers prefer to have the luxury of that kind of a luxury while they are traveling. This is an example of how fashionable matatus are. You can see the art and the colors and the beauty, both inside and outside a matatu. Now, most people who have taken these notorious public transport vehicles, matatus, know that they might encounter quick-witted or even rude touts who are workers who take the money, or reckless, impatient drivers weaving through the standstill traffic, loud bass-filled music coming from the amplified speakers, and host of decorations, bumper stickers, and designs that contributes to various social topics. Now, workers use African American rappers and Kenyan artists, hip-hop, reggae music, popular culture, and sheng to assist in crafting an identity located in the social margin. So when you get inside the matatu, you see this combination of colorful depictions of rappers, reggae music stars, people considered as celebrities both inside the country and outside the country. And this is the point that matatu is a site for pop culture. So inside the matatu, you see more unique experiences the owners can make, because the more unique experiences the owners of the cars make, the more successful they will become. So if your vehicle is not well decorated, doesn't have this kind of depiction of the pop culture, it doesn't attract many customers. Matatu arts ranges from commercial, anti-government protests, religious messages, and simple, counterculture expressions. And some people have called this matatu culture. So we're calling it here, matatu is a site for pop culture, but some people have actually called that as matatu culture specifically. So this is also an explanation of matatu as a site for pop culture. So you can see some sleek artwork, painted graffiti, designs on the exterior body of the matatus. Usually there is loud music, as you can see in one of the pictures at the middle there, with very comfortable seats. Some of them are fitted with Wi-Fi, so the passengers can enjoy free surfing on the internet. Some of them have flat screens and televisions for passengers to enjoy movies, news, and music videos. And others have CCTV cameras to monitor security inside a matatu, because not all the stories are very good about being in a matatu. So if matatu elucidates everyday politics of men who labor in lower classes, as matatu workers are both victims of society built along economic hierarchies and instigators of problematic masculinity. But again, matatu also offers youth employment. So those who have to do the graffiti, those who have to do the drawings and the paintings are young people who do not have better economic activities. Now, without matatu, it might be hard to think about the uniqueness of how Kenyans perceive building the nation. So I want us to think about how matatu helped build a nation. Matatus were made solely by Africans. That's a key point that we have said before, that this is an industry that does not have external interventions. But again, looking at matatu, you see the problems of the government. Like, for example, what I have cited before is the police have to take bribes from the matatu drivers almost on everyday basis. But also matatu, on the same vein, acts as a place where the government is pressured to build better roads and give better infrastructure. Because of the artwork that is articulated within the matatu, then this becomes a path to escape poverty for many people who act as drivers or artisans to decorate the matatu both inside and outside. Matatu workers have conflicting relationships with the state, particularly amid the transportation reforms aimed at Matatu. So many times they try to do reforms because of the chaos that are associated with this industry. And these reforms include forcing owners to paint their vehicles on solid colors with yellow stripes, install speed governors, insisting that workers wear uniforms, among others. These laws have been tried in several years, but it seems that this is an area that the state has been unable to fully control. So when the state seeks to implement regulations, it seems that Matatu industry always captures and dynamic methods they invent to negotiate the difficult conditions of being informal laborers. So Matatu's workers, often in response to the state regulation, show that they wrestle with deep inequalities, not just to eke a living, but to expand stable economic opportunities to those linked to Matatu industry. For example, in the creative arts. For several decades now, the Matatu industry has provided a rare example of a highly profitable business that has turned out to be vital to the development of Nairobi and its identity. So to understand the industry of Nairobi and its rapid growth, we need to understand the history of Matatu. Similarly, if we want to understand the triumph of Matatu, we need to understand the particular social, economic, cultural, and political history of post-colonial Nairobi. The story of Matatu cannot be found anywhere else, anywhere but on the peripheries of the society, on the rough streets and in the dirty garages, and among the grease-stained entrepreneurs who tend to thrive outside the purview of bureaucrats and politicians, and all too often outside the law. And though the story may start around the margins of Nairobi, it does not end there. Eventually, the history of Matatu will take everyone involved, the workers, the passengers, the police, the gangs, and the government, on the rough ride straight into the center of the city. And this is what makes Matatu unique. So it's not just a vehicle, it's a place to enjoy the culture and the Kenyan people to voice their voices. It's also a place where the government meets the ordinary people and therefore can help us to understand how the state relates with its people on daily terms. If you want to read more about this Matatu issue, I recommend you to look at a book written by Mutongi Kenda about Matatu, a history of popular transportation in Nairobi. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope to see you again.